Yo guys, what is up? Max in our first Descendant video, and today we're going over my updated guide to Hailey. Now, Hailey got a bunch of cool new toys, some of them good, some of them bad, in the most recent update. They added 2 new Descendant modules and the new Frostwatcher scout rifle for her, and today we're going to be going over everything you need to know about her new builds and the new Descendant modules, whether they're worth using and not. We're going to kind of format this video. We're going to go over the build for the new Descendant modules, the Frostwatcher, and so on. And then at the end, I'm going to kind of do a breakdown on the pros and cons of using these things, because while the Descendant modules are solid, they're not a must use in my opinion. And so I'll break down my reasoning for that. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get right into it. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is Hailey's new mobbing Descendant module, which is Cryogenic Cluster Shot. This modifies her 1 to allow the 1, once it's hit an enemy, to, if you shoot at him, to proc a cryo explosion that hits in a large AoE. The idea behind this mod is that it's going to enhance her ability to mob and kill trash mobs, because when you shoot your 1 into a pack, you can follow it up by a bunch of gunshots and cause a bunch of AoE explosions. Now, there's a few downsides and positives to this mod. The first is that the additional damage that we deal with our guns gets cut in half. So initially, if we take off Cryogenic Cluster Shot, if we're shooting an enemy, the additional damage is 50%. So whatever our final damage is that we hit, so if the final damage is like crit or whatever, it's a bunch of damage. If we do that, and that damage is going to get cut in half and then added again. With Cryogenic Cluster Shot, we're only getting 1/4 of our gun damage added on to our shots, so obviously a bit of a downside there. The next thing is that we are going to get less stacks on an enemy. So with Cryogenic, I only get 3 shots against an enemy with the 25% damage increase, versus if I take that off, I'm now going to get 9 shots on an enemy with 50% damage increase. So the emphasis with this is definitely more on, hitting a bunch of enemies with the explosion, because you're dealing less gun damage and less of your bullets are going to get that gun damage increase. So where the pros of this mod come in is when we shoot enemies with the cryogenic cluster applied to them, we are going to be getting a pretty big explosion. That explosion has a 250 base max expandable radius, and it's fairly low on the skill damage. It's 119 skill power, so we're going to be scaling that up with Hailey via crit damage on this build, because Hailey very easily hits 100% skill crit chance, and then also some boost to her chill power and modifier, as well as singular. And that is kind of the basis of her Cryogenic Cluster Shot. Now we're doing a few interesting things with this to try to maximize its potential, which we're about to break down. So there's a few things in our modding decisions that are really important with this mod, to make it feel good, because I've gotten to a place where I think it feels solid, but I originally just hated this module. And the first thing that's really important is to get it on a 0-second cooldown. Now, as you can see, it is on a 2-second cooldown. One thing that is very interesting about this mod is that when we add it, we lose the dimension tag. Obviously, when we're using it with dimension, we can use something like multi-talented, which gives us a ton of cooldown, and you can get this cooldown to be literally 100% uptime. We need to put on as much cooldown stuff as possible to get it to basically 0 cooldown. As you can see, it says 2 seconds, but it's pretty much on 100% cooldown, because what you'll notice here is when we fire it, the cooldown actually starts once the skill is procced. So let's spawn some enemies in here real quick, and let's turn off their invincibility. So I'm going to click the button, look at the cooldown. As it's firing, it's already going on its cooldown, so it's by the time that it's done firing, it's basically off of cooldown, and we're going to want that to be the condition for us, because we want to be able to spam this to get as much damage out of this mod, because its base damage is not great, so we want it to be on as many enemies and up as often as possible to really improve our damage. Now, the one thing that you probably saw there is a bunch of cryo explosions, and there is a new Frostwatcher weapon that was added that we'll talk about in a second. But in my time testing this, the Frostwatcher is really difficult to actually use with Hailey, especially in 400% dungeons. Think of this more as like a bossing weapon, or a weapon that is going to allow you to amplify the damage of your abilities for high single targets, rather than a mobbing weapon, even though it does have the like reduced or increased movement speed on it. It really shines more so for buffing up our bossing damage, which we'll talk about when we get to bossing. But the Thunder Cage is really great because the big interesting thing about this mod is that we don't need to kill the enemy to proc the cryo explosion, right? If I shoot them, as you can see, I'm getting the cryo explosion as I'm shooting them. But the Thunder Cage, while this enemy doesn't have cryo on them, the Thunder Cage, its explosion counts as a firearm hit, and so it will proc more cryo explosions on enemies, even if it doesn't kill them. So the Thunder Cage is just going to help us cascade our damage a whole lot more than something like the Frostwatcher, because it's going to be constantly proccing all of the frost damage on enemies, which leads to bigger damage first, versus the Frostwatcher, which we got to shoot at like each individual enemy each time. And just like from that test alone, you could probably tell that the Frostwatcher doesn't work all that well with it. You kind of really need the Thunder Cage to really make this work for mobbing. Next, we're going to talk about her boss build and her new Transcendent mod, Supercooled Kuiper round. Now, this reads, equipping a unique weapon decreases additional firearm attack and fire rate, but increases weak point damage, and successfully attacking a weak point recovers shield instead of MP. The increase in weak point damage decreases when firing a unique weapon, but increases again on a successful weak point attack. So the way that this mod works is basically when you first fire it, if you're using Supercooled Kuiper round, when you first fire it and hit a boss, you're going to do slightly less damage than if you weren't using it when you had it equipped. So just note that this Transcendent mod is not going to do much for you at all on bosses that you are killing in like 2 to 3 shots, because your net like 3% damage loss on your first shot with the sniper when using this. However, as you shoot more, and if you are successfully attacking and hitting weak points, you will stack up to more damage. I netted out in our testing about a 34% damage increase on the final shot from this if we hit all of our weak point shots. And so it is a damage increase for Hailey, and it is good. But if you're killing a boss in like, 2 snipe shots and like a 1 shot of your 2, which Hailey can kill most bosses in like 2 to 3 shots of her sniper and the click of her 2, you're not going to really notice too much of a difference, especially if you're not hitting weak points. If you're not hitting weak points, you're actually going to be dealing less damage. So this isn't a like must use mod. It's kind of a if you want to play this style. However, on more difficult bosses where you need the extra damage and you're going to be hitting weak points, this mod is really, really helpful. The biggest difference that I noticed for bosses that I use Hailey on was actually Swamp Walker. My Swamp Walker kill as a solo player was a little bit inconsistent without this mod. Having like 30% more damage on our final shots against Swamp Walker led to very consistent 1 phases where we didn't have to deal with like Swamp Walker's additional shenanigans that he does, because Swamp Walker is honestly probably one of the most annoying bosses. Obviously, the rest of these bosses you can't queue for solo, but just note that if you are playing Hailey and you're going to be using this mod, if you're going to go for Swamp Walker, this is definitely a must-have in my opinion. For the mods on the build, they're pretty much staying the exact same, with the exception of I'm adding Skill Insight over Glacial Succinctium. Glacial Succinctium is what I was using on the old Hailey build, and it's still what I was using in this video, I'm going to be honest with you, but I kind of wanted to update the video because once the reactor changes go live, they go live in 7 days, I'm no longer going to be using this mounting. This is the mounting that I was using with skill critical hit rate and singular boost ratio. This skill critical hit rate maxes out my crit chance to 100% with Hailey, so I didn't need it as a mod. However, once the reactor changes go live, I will be swapping my piercing. I'm just going to imprint my piercing on this reactor, which has gold Colossus damage and gold critical hit damage. That is absolutely disgusting. And then so for that, because that's only going to net us out at like 70 or like 86% crit chance, we can just cap out the crit chance with skill insight there. And then the last thing that you can do for modding is you can get rid of this strong mentality to put Glacial Shashinctium there. Let me just show you what that looks like if it will let me. Experience Shield there, and then Glacial there. And the reason you would do that is if you wanted to get like a little bit more damage out of her. The reason I'm not doing that is I know you guys like to save catalysts on non-ultimate Descendants. Hailey is non-ultimate, and this M slot is already like given on her, so if you really want to max out her damage as much as possible, you could put Glacial here, and then you get the crit, you get the Spear and Shield, you get the Shot Focus, and you get the Glacial. But once again, you would need to over catalyze her, and it's not going to make that much of a difference. Strong Mentality is pretty nice here because it lets us reduce our mana drain of our 3, and our third and second abilities are all pretty big mana cost abilities. So it's kind of nice to have the mana reduce, but just noted that if you really wanted to like max out that damage, I would put in Glacial Shashinctium here, and then that would be the final bossing build. For our last two builds, we've got kind of tank Hailey builds. Hailey, while her like ability damage builds will destroy basically the entire boss ladder, they struggle against Gluttony and Deathstalker. So these two builds are specifically for Hailey, and using her with the Enduring Legacy, I think, is like her best option there to just rain down gun damage. Hailey's 3 gives her increased firearm critical hit rate and crit damage, and her passive gives her more weak point damage, and her 1 gives you a 50% damage multiplier to your gun damage for 9 shots, and you can just pepper enemies with this to make her, in my opinion, probably the strongest gun character in the game. It's pretty disgusting. And so the first build is a Deathstalker build with 25,000 shield. We are able to use Overwhelming Shield, HP Amplification, HP Conversion, and increased HP to stack up a ton of survivability. We're going to obviously don't have a direct way to recover our shield, so we're going to be using Biosync Shield, that if anytime we walk over an HP increase, we are going to be getting that increased HP back, which is going to be converted into shield. We've got Shot Focus for extra gun damage. We've got Defense for even more survivability. And then if you wanted to invest into this build a little bit more, the one change that I personally would make is I would swap Strong Mentality for MP Conversion. I haven't fully catalyzed this out yet, but I don't think you fully need like double maximum like mana reservation stuff. MP Conversion will give you a little bit more cooldown so that you can spam your 1 a little bit more, that you can get that damage multiplier, but it's just a little bit of a sacrifice that you have to make on the like shield build. For the gun version of the build, we're going to be making up the cooldown that we lost on the shield version. So we're going to be using MP Conversion with Nimble Fingers to give us a bunch of cooldown. This is a Dimension ability, so we're also going to be using Multi-Talented, which gives us 20% more cooldown, and a unranked tech mod for Focus on Tech. Obviously, this is not buffing up our damage. We don't care about our ability damage on this, so we're just going to be using it for another 6.1% cooldown. Slap on. Obviously, we're not caring about our ability stuff, so we can just put on like a gold cooldown reactor, and now when we're going to be firing, this is our cooldown. So we achieve basically 100% uptime. So you can just be firing your gun and all the while just clicking your 50% damage increase with 100% uptime, which is disgusting. And then also we're going to be obviously clicking our third ability to give that more crit chance. So that's the setup to make the 1 pretty disgusting. And then we're going to be using 2 HP mods. We want to be tanky, and a defense mod. That's going to help out a ton. We're going to be using Maximize Conservation to reduce our cost of our skills, because obviously we're going to be very spammy with this build. And then we're also going to be using Shot Focus for some extra damage. Once again, with this kind of build, your components getting rolls like MP Recovery in combat and Max MP will make a massive difference in your ability to spam your stuff. This is the catalyst layout. If you're trying to copy the setup, note that you can catalyze over this M slot to a V slot or a triangle slot for the boss deletus max damage if you want to get rid of that strong mentality, but not overly needed. Now, in terms of weapons, reactors, components, and all that good stuff, the Frostwatcher is a very interesting weapon for bossing. I'm going to be totally honest with you guys. I cannot be bothered to farm for another mounting. I spent so much time farming for mountings for Hailey to farm for another Frostwatcher mounting. I'm just going to, when the mounting changes come, I'm just going to add the Frostwatcher to my already god tier reactors. So I don't have a mounting to test with this thing. But there's a few interesting things about this. One, it's going to hit a lot less hard as the gun damage portion on your fourth ability due to the fact that it just simply does not hit as hard as a sniper rifle. Not even close. As you can tell, it's 45,000 base damage with 193,000 being its competitor with way more like crit damage stacking on the sniper rifle. So I wouldn't recommend this thing if you're really trying to build around the 4. Where this thing is interesting is kind of when the reactor changes go live and you can swap stuff, because I think you will be able to do a really cool thing where basically you just walk into the fight as Hailey and shoot this and make sure that you are proccing the Sub-Zero sensation for the 32% skill power. This will make a big old difference to Hailey's second ability, the Storm Snare. Obviously, this is not affected by the weapon that you're holding, besides it being like you need to have it mounted. And that goes away as soon as you are, like that buff goes away as soon as you swap weapons. So you'd want to click the 2 with the Frostwatcher active with the 30% damage increase and the chill. And that will do a lot of damage. And then you swap weapons as you're going into your fourth ability to blast with a sniper rifle, ideally the piercing light or the afterglow, to deal a bunch of damage to her, like with her bossing setup. But that's going to be a possibility that's only really possible once the reactor changes go live and you can have both of these kind of working on your boss build. For the Frostwatcher rifle, I just modded mine. I haven't finished it yet, but I wanted to try to get it from its base 6% crit chance to 100% crit chance, because then every shot would proc the chill resistance down, which is awesome. And with this setup, we actually achieved that. So with edging shot plus better insight, we actually get up to 75% critical hit chance on the weapon. And then when dopaminergic procs, this actually, the math brings us to it's not like displayed in the stats, but this brings us to a 99% crit chance on this weapon. So we're guaranteed basically a crit when this is proccing on weak points. Obviously, it's got a 5-second cooldown, but we want to make sure that we can fire this weapon a few times and proc its weak point damage increase, or it's like 30% buff, and also get full stacks of its chill resistance, which only procs on crits. So I basically built this thing to just do some crits, fire quickly, and deal some extra damage. So you shoot the boss with it and then proc your like second ability for a bunch of damage. Obviously, I didn't really showcase that because I don't have a mounting for it yet. So I'd just be missing like 60% damage if I was doing that. But once again, once those reactor changes go live, that's what I'd be using. For like actual bossing weapon, I still recommend the piercing light. At the end of the day, between the afterglow or the piercing light, whatever you have a better reactor for was the one that you should use. Piercing light will still net you out higher damage hits than the afterglow at a max hit when they're both critting. And they're both hitting weak points. So that's why I rock the piercing light. You can use technically like a Frostwatcher with payout so that you can shoot more and kind of spam your shots. I don't think that's overly worthwhile just because it's less DPS, because you're going to be dealing less damage. You get more shots, but boss fights are all about how hard can you hit as fast as you can. And when a boss is down and we're getting our huge damage multiplier with Dangerous Ambush, I'd rather be hitting harder than be hitting less and more often, because it's only a short window that we get to deal as much damage as possible. And if the boss goes immune, all those extra shots are going to waste. So I still recommend the Piercing Light or the Afterglow for your like weapon to deal with bosses. This is the Piercing Light build that I rock. There are some still mods that still do not work. Elements do not work for the 4th ability. Mods like Real Life Fighter do not work for the 4th ability. The 2 mods that I have had success with that do work are Weak Point Expansion and Special Sight. I use Weak Point Expansion for like the easier bosses when I just kind of need to shoot once or twice. This gives us a almost 6 times multiplier when we are going to be hitting a weak point on a boss, which is disgusting because we compare that with our double damage from crits, which, you know, this hits really, really hard. And for like group bosses or bosses that have a bigger health bar, something like Swampwalker, where you're really going to need those extra shots, or you're going to be taking those extra shots, I use Special Sight for the 30% more weak point damage while aiming. This does proc on the 4th ability, which is very nice, and that is kind of the setup for the Piercing Light. There's the group, there's the solo, or the, like, you can think of group as like, you know, basically Swampwalker. For the components, for the shield build, I recommend rocking all as highest roll HP components as you can, and particularly getting the Invader set, the top piece and the bottom piece for max HP rolls, and try to get on your processor max shield and, oop, I'm actually wearing the wrong one, max shield and shield recovery modifier on your bottom Invader piece. And then for bossing, in terms of like just dishing out as much damage as possible, we're going to want to use the Slayer set. Getting Slayer MP in combat is really the most important role there, and getting some HP so you're not squishy and the bosses don't shred you. But 4-piece Slayer for bossing is still what we're going to be going for bossing. And then for like just general play, for rocking Hailey, there are a few options. You can go 2-piece Polar and 2-piece like Veteran, which can be pretty nice for extra firearm critical hit rate and also chill skill power. Veteran 4-piece you could rock, but once again, you lose a bit of survivability. For like general use, which is not the HP build, or for general use, which is not the shield build and not the bossing, 4-piece Polar set's actually pretty cool for Hailey. You get the chill skill power, and then whenever you proc Frostbite on enemies, you can get crit damage on your firearms and crit damage on your skills, and proc Frostbite explosions when you're killing enemies, which is actually very synergistic with kind of what she's trying to do for mobbing. I did not have this for the video. I was mainly just rocking my like normal set that I use, which is 2-piece Annihilation and right now 2-piece Invader, which gives me, I'm mainly using this because I just have really good rolls. The MP recovery in combat, max MP gold rolls is really hard to take off, especially when we're spamming as much as we are on Hailey. But I think the ideal thing for mobbing would be 4-piece Polar. You would deal with 1 max shield piece, so you'd lose a little bit of survivability, but the explosions and the damage should be pretty cool with it. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. Hailey's new Transcendent modules are solid, but they're not like the best thing since sliced bread. I think if they made it so that if your cryogenic cluster shots impact killed an enemy and you were using the cryogenic cluster shot mod, it would proc the cold explosion, would be insane quality of life for this and make it feel way better. Because a lot of times with this, even though on paper it can be really good, a lot of times you're just killing all the enemies with the initial shot and you're not actually getting to like do the explosions. But when you get it cooking with the Thunder Cage, it's awesome. And her new module is definitely not a must use for bossing. However, for extended boss fights where you're firing out multiple shots, such as Swampwalker, it makes a large difference, racking up over around 30% damage increase to her final shots. And yeah, guys, that is it for the video. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. I'll catch you on the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.